very warm welcome to our institute, the Early Music Department of the MDW. And we'd like to get started and introduce our organizing team first. So, Augusta has thought about something.
Yes, actually, I think we're in Partimento country this week. So I thought I would introduce our government. We have the Prime Minister, Magdalena Hasibeda. We have the Minister of Finances, Erich Draxler. What else did we? The Ministry of Social and Health is outside, sitting behind. No, sorry, they're outside, sitting behind the table. Then we have
The Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Oh yeah, that's me.
Augusta.
And the social affairs. You were the inner, sorry. We forgot this was a rather last-minute thing, so we're doing a bit of input. And Dimitri is also in the... Please stand up, Dimitri. Yeah. So that you know, one person is missing. She is not able to be here today. That's Sobin Yo. And then we would like to introduce our speakers so that everybody knows who everybody is. The first speaker is not here yet, but he will be arriving. Then we have John Mortensen, if you would, yeah. Giorgio Sanguinetti. Peter van Toer, Matteo Messori, Robert de Bree, Markus Schwenkreis, Karin Nelson, Niels Pfeffer, he hasn't come yet, okay. Yes, that's it for the people who are here at the moment.
Nicoletta Pargivesco will not be here because she's ill, that's a pity. Yes.
And the same for Patrick Ayrton, who's still on one of the lists.
Yes. So, now for some organizational comments. We want to invite all the speakers for a dinner tonight, as we wrote in an email. So please just tell us if you will be here after the harvest time.
And then there are many other, unfortunately, organizational things. We're trying to save on paper. So you will find all the programs, workshops, and things on QR codes. They are outside already at the moment, but we will have them in really big format afterwards. So that's coming.
Then for the students, you will get credits for your being here, but you have to write your names into the list for every session.
So yeah, the list is at the door, so please don't forget to do that.
Then for the workshops, they are starting tomorrow morning. So we start every morning at 10 here in the hall together with Jason, and he will start right now with a little warm-up afterwards that you can see how our work is going. And after this warm-up at 10:30, there will be 5 or 6 different rooms we will show you around for the different workshops. There is a plan for the students. It will be complex, but I hope it will work everything.
Yes, we have about 50 students involved, so you can imagine what that's going to be like for organization-wise. So the people who are on the waiting list, make sure you are active and see where people are not turning up or people are changing things, and then you can step in.
So, as for the streaming, all the sessions in the afternoon will be streamed live, and you can also see them afterwards in online. For that, we need the microphones. We would not need them for this small room, but we want to get used to it. So if there are any questions and answers, we have to give you the microphones after the lectures. The official beginning is at 2 o'clock with our rector, and the streaming starts right then.
I think that's it for now. Are there any questions about organization or so? You can always come to us, or you can go to the desk. And
can you clarify what harvest time entails?
pass you to the person who thought of this term.
Yeah. The harvest time should just be a platform where things can just be presented, and it's like also to show work in progress. And actually, it's quite free, but it should be like an unofficial performance, but without the necessity of having whole pieces or having really a concert-like atmosphere. It really should be like showing the work in progress, sharing the projects you're all working on. So really a quite free atmosphere, and just to share things and really to learn from each other. That's the plan for the harvest times. Let's see how it's going to turn out.
And the harvest time will not be streamed, so that's really in private, and everything is possible.
Will the streaming be recorded?
Yes.
The streaming will be recorded. We have not decided how long it will be online, but at least a week.
Okay, I think that's it.
So I want to hand over to Jason, who will start with a little warm-up.
Thank you. All right, so there's not maybe space for everyone, but I hope we will do our best to all stand up and come around the harpsichords. Without stepping on the mics as I just did.
Ja, bitte. Ja, okay, genau.
So all around, there are more mics here to not step on or topple. Don't be shy. So the warm-up, I think it's been, it's going to be singing, because we have some people behind the harpsichord. Please come on the stage, and as close as possible, because the harpsichord is going to be a little bit soft.
Do you want to open it?
Yeah, maybe, I don't know whether, maybe we get a lock here. Is that okay? And if I'm a little bit more ambitious, I would like a few more people on stage, please. Come. And today we'll have a little tiny introduction to two very basic concepts, the hexachord and the perfect or double cadence. Maybe it will just be a conjunct cadence sometimes. And this we'll do in this way. First, we sing a hexachord, everyone in their own range, from re, mi, fa, sol, la. Okay, so. Re, mi, fa, sol, la. Okay, a little bit slower. So, re, we can always breathe. So just up, and now I will play a little bit, a few interludes, and then every time we have a perfect cadence, we'll sing this hexachord. Okay? have to start as low as possible because it's a sixth. So if we're not a singer, then if we start do re mi fa, it's going to be. Yeah, so as low in your voice as possible. Yeah, so I suppose we all know. Can you all hear me? Yeah. I suppose we all know what a cadence sounds like. It will be in major, hopefully all the time. So it needs to be a major cadence. Yeah. So whenever this happens, then we go. Very good. Very good. Okay, so here we go. We'll have maybe a minute of this, okay? So bear with me. Just re mi fa sol la, maybe without the sixth note. So we start on the second note of the hexachord, and that is what we do when we have a minor cadence. So if we have re mi fa sol la, re mi fa. Enough for today. We'll do a little bit more of this every day, and it will get more and more complicated. So be sure you're here for some coffee before. Thank you.
Hello again. I hope everybody has got a seat. I want to introduce to you again Augusta Campagne. Thank you for speaking about the beginning. How did Partimento start? Did it fall from heaven? You titled your lecture. Augusta has worked about earlier music than Partimento, and she's trying to get the link. She worked about Simone Verrovio in her dissertation and about accompaniment around 1600 in a large online book. And the newest is the harpsichord in the 16th century. So we are now starting from the earlier period. Thank you, Augusta. And
thank you, Magdalena. So, did Partimenti fall from heaven? This question is borrowed from one of the famous pioneers of early music here in Vienna, Joseph Merten. Ist der Generalbass vom Himmel gefallen? Did Basso Continuo fall from heaven? In it, he traced the development that led to Basso Continuo and showed some of antecedents. Today, I would like to do something similar with Partimenti. We'll tend to look forward in time, to look at the next stage, to what comes after. I would like to take this opportunity to look back a little before we start this conference. We tend to think of Partimenti as a relatively recent discovery. But in Paris, the famous pedagogue, pianist, and composer Nadia Boulanger was still teaching and using Partimenti in the 1960s. They're also known to and studied by several musicologists in the middle of the 20th century. Researchers such as Fellerer published extensively about them. However, in the world of practical music outside France and German-speaking musicological circles, Partimenti were not well known. In the 1990s, players and music theorists began to study Partimenti once again. But it wasn't until the fundamental books by Robert Jerdingen and a little later Giorgio Sanguinetti that Partimenti really took off, both as a basis for performance and above all as a pedagogical tool. I'm really happy that they are both here with us this week. Thank you, Giorgio. In the last 15 years or so, most attention has been paid to the Neapolitan school. More recently, we've seen research into sources in Bologna and Venice, where similar collections have been found. In Germany, too, we find basses presented as a basis for learning how to compose, to improvise, or to play basso continuo. Sometimes these are embedded in long treatises, such as Mattheson's, and sometimes they are pure collections of basses, such as the Kirchhoff collection. Before we begin this conference centered around sources from the 18th century and the growing interest in the 19th century, I would like to reflect on two aspects. Where did Partimenti come from? And why is there so much interest in Partimenti nowadays, leading us to the Partimento heaven we seem to be aiming for at the moment? Before starting, it seems useful to gain an understanding of the term Partimenti and its etymological origins. Nowadays, we use the term Partimento to define all kinds of sketches or shorthand notations of basses that can be used as exercises. On the one hand, we have the shorter exercises, such as regoli and moti del basso, and on the other hand, we have longer bass lines, sometimes with some hints on how to realize them. These basses can also be used as the basis for pieces to be played in concerts or church services, whether improvised extemporaneously or notated. In the 18th century, such basses, however, had many more names than just Partimento. For example, Bassi, Bassi diminuite, Basso continuo, Sonate, Probestück, or Preludium und Fuga, etc. Around 1600, Partimento was just one of the many names given to what we now call a basso continuo part, and the term was used mainly in Naples and Sicily. The main difference between a basso part intended for the performance by a melodic instrument or a voice and a basso part for perfect instruments, this is an instrument capable of playing all the parts, was that the latter were spartiti or partiti, that is, divided, or in modern terms, subdivided into bars and caselle, by what we now call bar lines, but even that is not always the case. We like to systemize and have umbrella terms, but the terminology we use is frequently anachronistic. It is important to realize that terms such as partimento or basso seguente or partitura may have had one or even several different meanings a few hundred years ago. On this slide, you can see the bass line for a perfect instrument, the basso principale, with bar lines, and below the bass part of the same piece for a bass instrument without. In his article Satzmodelle des Contrapunto alla Mente und ihre Bedeutung für den Stilwandel 1600, Volker Fröbe shows a similarity between the contrapunto alla mente models and 18th century schemata from a music theory point of view. One of the aspects he stresses is the historical continuity of the use of models or schemas, schemata, however you want to pronounce it, from the vocal polyphony of the 15th and 16th centuries into the Baroque era and beyond. Daniele Filippi, on the other hand, has shown that the appearance of institutions such as conservatori and ospedali was nothing new in the 18th century. The foundation for the conservatori and ospedali and other such institutions that educate children in music lies in the 16th century. The Jesuits started running boarding schools for musically talented boys in the mid-16th century. Local churches paid for the tuition, and the students repaid them by singing. The girls in the Venetian ospedali were already praised for their musicianship in a print with music by Giovanelli in 1598. But what about musical examples? The earliest partimento sources that are featured in this conference are by Bernardo Pasquini, Corelli's harpsichordist. These consist of pieces for 1 and 2 keyboard instruments. But there were other sources in the 17th century. Many, such as Muffat, a student of Pasquini, and Johann Nenning or Spiridion, present shorter examples with many illustrations of how to realize what in partimento language are called moti del basso. Here, for example, are some of the so-called Monte Romanesca basses. Spiridion a Monte Carmelis with 16 examples. Oops, sorry. Yes, we are. How to realize this bass? The first such printed Italian source to present examples with many variations for keyboard can be found in the second book of the second part of Girolamo di Ruta's Il Transilvano of 1609. Di Ruta presents 315 examples of how to realize and vary shorter themes or cadences by Gabriele Fattorini, using contrapuntal techniques such as invertible counterpoint and canon. Having the theme or fuga or soggetto in the bass, however, is only one possibility. But the first to explicitly mention the importance of the movimento del basso, the way the bass moves, the bass motion for a player upon the bass, is Francesco Bianciardi. He packs all his possibilities into one shorter example, and thus shows every bass movement only once. But here's the pattern of fifth up, and fourth down. Outside Italy, we also find examples before 1600. Tomás de Santa Maria, libro acclamado Arte de tener fantasia from 1565, has many examples, but again, they are not solely based on the bass. The earliest example I know of containing realized examples on the bass line can be found in the Fundamenta associated with Konrad Paumann from the last quarter of the 15th century. Again, we find the pattern of rising fifth and descending fourth. Of course, these examples are not different from more practical methods for written counterpoint and, more importantly, for contrappunto alla mente, cantare super librum, cantare sur le livre, etc., if the bass acts as the generative line. Here's an example from Lusitano. Today, however, I will restrict myself specifically to keyboard sources. As several authors, such as Sanguinetti and Bellotti, have pointed out, Adriano Banchieri is considered to be the first writer-composer to have used a proto-partimento, bases, as a guide for improvising verses. These bases were used to respond to the choir in church services in alternatim. In this Amen, we encounter the 5th up, 4th down pattern we've been following so far, although filled in, followed by a cadence. These examples are for the organ. They contain the Kyrie verses 1 and 3, whilst the choir responds with the second verse. As you can see, just like in the 18th century partimenti, some such verses, such as the first, are on a pure bass line. Others, like the second, are on what we would now call a basso seguente. This verse presumably starts with the alto part, followed by the entrance of the tenor, and subsequently the bass entrance. Like in later times, if we're not sure how to proceed when realizing this Kyrie, we can consult realized versions of analogous verses in intavolatura notation. In 1598, Vincenti published the Intavolatura d'organo facilissima, containing verses to respond to the choir in masses, psalms, and everything else that is necessary for the choir. It should be noted that, in contrast to certain realized versions of partimenti, these are not identical pieces. However, they are based on the same contrapuntal material, and the similarities are nevertheless striking. The theme, or fuga, to use Di Ruta's terminology, is essentially identical in both cases. They are both based on the opening of the Kyrie of the Messa della Madonna. At the end of the 16th century, Giovanni Matteo Asola published a collection of bases for organists to respond to the choir properly. This collection was reprinted at least 8 times, both in Venice and Milan. Excuse me. The first edition was from 1592, the last from 1635. And in fact, the photograph I'm showing you is from a Milanese reprint from 1612. This example is from a Kyrie for the Feast of the Madonna. The same chant that seems to be the basis of Banchieri's first Kyrie, and of the Intavolatura d'organo facilissima example, shown previously. As you probably know, it was also used by Frescobaldi in the Fiori Musicali of 1635. Although there are several earlier examples of Italian alternatim verses, like the Intavolatura facilissima, mainly in manuscript, so far Asolo, however, is the earliest source I've found with a basso or single bass line notation in print. Both Banchieri and Asola, as well as the Intavolatura, only present the verses that should be played on the organ, not the whole chant, and can therefore only be used by the organist. Once more, a number of southern German manuscripts appear to represent much earlier examples of such chorale books that were produced specifically as models for organists. There is a collection of 5 Orgelbücher created for use in the church in Augsburg between 1511 and 1518, mainly by the organist Bernhard Rehm. Yet again, only the verses that the organist would play are notated. Nevertheless, as an examination of the Asola print and the Rehm manuscripts suggest, it should be possible for any book containing chants to serve as a basis for organ improvisation. In general, however, chant books were not specifically created with the organist in mind, whereas the sources shown today were. It also seems reasonable to assume that an active church organist in Venice would have been very familiar with the Kyrie from the Messa della Madonna. There were countless Marian feasts where this chant could be used. Many organists would have probably known the chant by heart. It seems likely that a similar situation would have prevailed in Augsburg some 80 years earlier. There was a marked decline in reliance on memory with the advent of printing in the 16th century. Notated sections of chant could have been used as mnemonic devices. Improvising alternatum verses over a chant, using sections of the chant, or even only a fragment as theme, or fuga, as Di Ruta calls it, from memory, could thus be seen as partimento alla mente. In secular music, the importance of memory is even more pronounced, particularly given the greater significance attributed to the outer parts. I don't know of any 16th century instructions about this specifically for keyboard players. Diego Ortiz provides some advice on how to proceed in concert. One of the manners he describes for a harpsichord when playing together with a viol is over a given bass. Such a bass can be either a tenore, this is a ground bass, he uses the folia, passamezzo antico, passamezzo moderno, and romanesca, or upon a cantus firmus. In this example, the cantus firmus La Spagna is notated above the viol part in a similar manner to the way the cantus firmus we encountered previously, for instance, in Asola was notated. In the Libro Secondo, Ortiz instructs the harpsichordist to play the cantus firmus in the bass, accompanied with consonances and some counterpoint fitting the ones for the viol. As Alon Sharp has demonstrated, Ortiz shows the reader how to use specific patterns, as Sharp calls them, on the cantus firmus. These patterns had previously been shown in the first book, the Tratado de Glossas. In this example, only one pattern and its inversions have been highlighted in the boxes. Except for the initial occurrence, this pattern is present in all instances when the cantus firmus ascends by a third. As Ortiz instructs the harpsichordist to add some counterpoints fitting the ones for the viol, presumably the harpsichordist should use such patterns in his realization. It is not my intention to provide a detailed analysis of Ortiz's work now, despite the wealth of intriguing insights it offers. This treatise is primarily directed at viol players. However, it does demonstrate that the practice of improvisation on a single bass line, whether it be a cantus firmus or a tenore, was a common occurrence in secular music around 1550. Although there are no extant written sources on this topic, there are numerous examples in both manuscripts and prints. The first such print is the Intavolatura Nova, printed in Venice in 1555. So, having established that already in the 16th century, we find basses that can be used both as exercises as well as solo pieces in sacred and in secular music, I will now quickly examine some of the reasons why I think patimenti have become so popular today and essential for the future education of musicians. The first is the developments of our understanding of memory, both from the historical perspective, as shown by Anna Maria Busseberger, and from the cognitive psychological perspective. The second is the way we are starting to look at the concept of a work, and the third is connected to contemporary ideas on pedagogy. Last June, I went to two very different presentations a day apart. Both, like Alon Schwab, use a system of boxes to indicate chunks, to use a psychological term. Different patterns, cells, themes, schemata, stock phrases, or in IAI terms, tokens. The first one, was for harpsichord students, where the Corelli Opus 5 number 1 sonata was analyzed in a larger context. This is a slide on the fugue. I would like to thank Magdalena Hasibeder for letting me use it. The second presentation was on Ludwig Senffer's Quinque Salutationes Ave Domino Jesu Christe by Birgit Lodes. The orange chunks are all based on a well-known antiphon Asperges me, which, as Birgit Lodes posited, many people in Senffer's time would have immediately recognized, With a system of boxes in other slides, she demonstrated that this chunk and another, Jesu Christe, are used in all voices in various forms. Nowadays, any music software can do this for us, thereby preventing us from having to use our memory in a similar manner as individuals did during the early 16th century. I'm not implying that working with colored boxes is something exceptional or new, but what I'm trying to get at is that such boxes are shortcuts. The term box also implies that if one is able to do so, one can unpack them. This has been demonstrated so convincingly by Peter Schubert and Massimiliano Guido with 131 Fattorini cadences from the Rotas Il Transilvano. One Fattorini cadence may be transformed into several variations, for example, by means of inversion. It all comes down to memory and how it works. In modern psychology, one of the methods used by the brain is called chunking, the breaking down of information into smaller units, which are then grouped together in a meaningful way. This makes it easier to retain the information. Chunking creates cognitive shortcuts. Bob Jerdingen has made a comparison between figure skating and partimenti. The individual skating figures work in a similar way to the schemata in partimenti or compositions. August Valentin Rabe has successfully compared 16th century fencing methods to fundamenta. Alon Sharp, in his Performer's Guide to Transcribing, Editing and Arranging Early Music, has had the rather amusing idea to calculate how much time the brain has to think about what can be improvised over one note of the Ortiz Cantus Firmus La Spagna. For first species counterpoint, note against note, at metronome mark minim is 92, you have about 2.6 seconds to decide what the next note is going to be. Easy. For second species counterpoint, you have 2.6 seconds to think about two notes. If one wants to use third species counterpoint and use dissonant passing notes, etc., one is left with 0.65 seconds to figure out what to do next. Your head will be on fire. It is, therefore, humanly impossible to improvise note by note if you want to do something slightly more refined. One needs to find recurring patterns or chunks or bits and create shortcuts and train these. Your mind needs to be able to recognize the signs for the shortcuts. This is what Ortiz does in his rechacadas. In the previous example, we saw the cells being used to train a specific possibility when the cantus firmus, or bass, goes up a third. It is presented at different pitches and inverted, and used in stretto. The third in the bass is the sign for the whole chunk. You don't need all the information. The mind is perfectly capable to make up for the lack of precision and add the missing information. Games such as Wordle are based on this principle. About 10 years ago, the term typoglycemia surfaced in psychology. Even if the information is incomplete or turned upside down or inverted, the brain can make up for this, if trained. If you're not familiar with the English language and alphabet, this will be just as meaningless as the correct version. The same principle makes you able to read this shorthand notation. Banchieri even presents some hints. The text is recited 3 times, there is a clef change, and there are some accidentals for the thirds and sixths. If you're well trained in this style, you might not do exactly the same as someone else does, but it will be similar. Banchieri, in fact, states that a figured bass with figures is a perfect score of all the parts, which brings me to the second reason why partimenti are so in vogue at the moment. We're still living with the remains of the 19th century concept of a work, with the prescriptive authority of notation. It is still common to think that any alteration of the musical text would destroy the very identity of the piece. While this might be true for the late 19th and 20th century, It was certainly not true for earlier music. Apart from the fact that the basso continuo part is only notated on one line and thus incomplete, we have come to realize that what CPI Bach calls wesentliche willkürliche Verzierungen were standard already in the 16th century with what, for example, the Rota called groppi, tremoli, minute, passaggi. We spend a lot of time trying to find the definitive text, but couldn't it just be alternative versions? Modern research has also come to the realization that many of the early music prints are exemplar, not necessarily definitive text. In his Ricercare Libro Secondo from 1549, Jacobus Bus already states the intabulations are examples. So does Claudio Mirolo. This is also the case for the Frescobaldi toccatas, as Rebecca Cypress has shown. This, of course, opens the can of worms about authorship, but let's leave that can closed today. The last factor why partimenti have seen such a surge in interest I would like to touch upon today is pedagogy. We all know things have been and are still changing. Things which were perfectly acceptable even 50 years ago are no longer acceptable. In secondary school in Holland, we had to learn 5 foreign languages. The first 2 years were just grammar, vocabulary, and a tiny bit of translating. The next 3 or 4 years were just reading and translating, no speaking. If you have recently learned a new language or know how programs like Duolingo work, you will immediately understand what I mean. But more about 21st century ideas on pedagogy this whole week. Back to the long 16th century. Massimiliano Guido and Peter Schubert have done fantastic work on De Ruta's method of teaching and learning in several books and articles from 2012 onwards, combining theory and practice. They have also reenacted De Ruta's teaching method in a series of exceedingly interesting videos. They highlight the idea of unpacking boxes and what Guido calls counterpoint in the fingers. I have put a few of these articles on this slide. More recently, August Valentin Rabe has shown that Tomás de Santa Maria also recommends a method on how to practice singing, reading, writing, playing, again combining several disciplines which nowadays are frequently still separated. Nowadays, we might find such things rather difficult, but that was also the case in the 16th century. Many 16th century methods, especially if they're in dialogue form, contain some kind of don't despair, take it step by step, and it will become easy. This is what is shown without words in the Patimento collections from the 18th century that we will mainly be studying and working with this week. But apart from the fact that the tradition of improvising over bass can be traced back to the 16th century, Fenaroli and Durante seem to have been famous as early as 1600, as can be seen from this collection of canzoni by Floriano Canale. I hope to have shown you a summary of the roots, a kind of myheritage.com of 18th century patimenti, traced back to the 16th century, and to have shown that patimenti did not fall from heaven. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Augusta, for this vivid introduction to this week. If